Hey everyone, welcome. This is super cool. I'm actually honestly so surprised that on like Thursday of Blockchain Week, there's such a cool, excited audience. I think it's testament to how interesting this topic is and how engaged people are. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Nathaniel, and I kind of spend a lot of my time looking at the crypto industry as a whole. So I do a thing called Long Read Sunday every week, and it's basically my job to like watch trends and patterns. And so when we were talking about this conversation, there's something that I've been kind of noticing for a while that I think is really interesting, which is one of the narratives that's kind of dominating crypto right now is the idea of like a smart contract platform war. And you see all these companies going to mainnet and offering alternatives to Ethereum, whatever, yada, yada, yada. And it's an appealing narrative because it's like combative and exciting and whatever. But meanwhile, you have this thing that's happening, which is that application developers are getting more specific about their needs, they know what they want, they're trying to figure it out, and around that, these layer 2 solutions are emerging to actually give them the tools that they need. And we're getting much better kind of as a whole about knowing where trade-offs are right between speed and security and figure it out. And so I think it's actually in some ways a much more interesting conversation to dig into layer 2 and figure out like where people are going to be building and what the different trade-offs there are and what the different solutions that are emerging are. So that's kind of the thing that was exciting to me about this. And so my philosophy in general about panels is just to kind of like roll the ball down the hill and let it go. And so what I'd like to do is just have this. We'll start with a quick round of introductions, just who you are, what your company does, and then I think we'll start kind of high level, I guess, and work back into the details. And we're going to make sure that we have a lot of time for audience questions as well. So start thinking about what you're most interested in talking about. So who's got the mic? I guess we'll start over here.
Hi everyone. Hi.
There you go.
Thank you for coming. My name is Georgios. My focus is on research and development on layer 2 scalability solutions. And most of my time has been spent on Plasma and Plasma Cash.
Hi everyone, my name is Mo. I'm from Center, and we are working on layer 2 scaling solutions for every blockchain. Our mission is to bring highly interactive, secure, and extremely low-cost applications to every blockchain. Currently, we work on Ethereum, and we are launching it in the next month. We already have about like a monthly active user of 20,000 people actively using our state channel networks, and share some very interesting stuff we learned from running the probably largest generalized state channel network in the world right now.
Hi there, I'm James. I am working with The Bridge, focused on accelerating application development, also helping the initiative with the Metacartel community, building a UX DAO.
Hello, my name is Kevin, and I'm a co-founder of the Nervous Project, Nervous Network. So we're not a Layer 2 project, but we believe that Layer 2 will win in the future. And for processing, running process and efficiency. So we're actually a Layer 1 protocol that's built for Layer 2 technology. So instead of competing on TPS, we provide we're a POW-based, slow and expensive blockchain, if you will, that works best with Layer 2. So yeah, that's it.
Hello, I'm François René from Alacris, and I am building a chain-agnostic operating system, which means that I want to make that development available to 30 million of programmers instead of just 20,000 very highly specialized blockchain programmers. And the way I want to do that is by building a language that will abstract away all the problems and all the concerns of blockchain specific. You can focus on your application at the business level, at the business logic of your application, and we'll take care of everything that underneath, and hopefully we'll be able to use all the great software from people here to accelerate it.
Hi, I'm Arjun from Connex. We are building a state channel network on top of Ethereum. We've been live since last October, operating with SpankChain, Ujo, a few others. Interested to share what we've learned from real users putting real money through the system and sometimes losing it.
Hi, I'm Anurag, from co-founder of Matic Network. Matic Network is a layer 2 scaling solution, kind of hybrid Plasma plus POS sidechain network. And the Plasma variant which we work on is Plasma More VP. We've kind of embarked on this in 2017, and we've kind of built a lot. And we've right now testnet, looking to mainnet soon. Happy to share my views on this plan.
Hello, I'm Jack O'Halloran with the Scale Network. We are an elastic blockchain network focused specifically on building elastic sidechains for Ethereum. So excited to get into it today.
Awesome. Okay, let's actually, I want to get a sense of the audience really quickly. So by a show of hands, first, how many of you work with one of these companies up here? Okay, cool. Great. How many of you are developers or building applications and thinking about these solutions? Okay, cool. And just, so are the rest of you kind of just generally interested? Okay, awesome. So it's kind of an even split, which is great. Just useful context, maybe. Okay, so I actually want to start on like the highest level, and then we can work our way down. So one thing that I'm always interested in is kind of like definitions and categories. And so I guess my first question is, this layer 2 heuristic, is it actually useful? Like, does layer 2, what does it describe, A? And is it a useful description, or is it like a weird, like where does it draw the lines between layer 1 and layer 2 and how they fit? I feel like the reason this question isn't kind of just an academic exercise is that people are trying to figure out what their solution stack is, and I'm kind of interested in how all you guys think about this definition. You know, are you in the layer 2 space, or has that been thrust upon you? I guess anyone can dive in.
All right, I'll take first cut. So I think layer 1 and layer 2 are very accurate descriptions of where we are today. I think these descriptions won't age well. And I think we're already starting to see nuances of what's layer 2, what's not layer 2, what's layer 1, what's not layer 1. And I think even the way developers are building applications is not the same as they thought about it probably in 2017, where they thought I'm just going to build something for Ethereum, and then I need to make it go faster. They're actually thinking about it holistically. How do I get users? How do I grow? I don't even need to promote the fact that blockchain is a part of my business. Like, that's part of the mindset. So I think we're going to start seeing many layers and many networks and many blockchains and many great solutions to scale with custody or without custody, and it's going to be exciting.
So I think it's useful to make a distinction between layer 1 and everything else, right? So these are all off-chain transactions. So it's a useful kind of way of framing what these solutions are, at least in the respect of, let's say, a blockchain like Ethereum, right? Ethereum has been in the market for a sufficiently long time, establishing security. And so when we do transactions off the chain, I think it accurately describes the class of solutions.
So I actually personally don't think the layer 1, layer 2 classification makes any sense. And the reason is that saying Plasma sidechains and channels are all layer 2, it doesn't puts Plasma sidechains and channels in strange competition with each other, even though they're not supposed to be. And the rationale behind this is that when you scale distributed systems, you can scale them either by scaling out, which means adding more parallel compute. So if you're building a server stack, you add more servers, or you can scale them up by upgrading the actual software to reduce the amount of computation that's happening. Right? So and those two processes are completely independent of each other. So what that means for Plasma channels is regardless of what happens on this place layer of you could have Ethereum and Ethereum beacon chain with a bunch of shards, or the main Ethereum chain and a bunch of plasmified side chains, or a bunch of side chains and something with Cosmos. You'd still be able to put a channel network on top of it to guarantee consistent usability across everything. And I think that's a distinction that a lot of people don't really get, because most people think of it as either I pick channels, or I pick Plasma, or I pick a side chain, which really is sort of a false trichotomy.
Cool. So I think I want to do just for the panelists. So I'm going to start by throwing in, maybe adding questions as they come in, just so you guys can talk and riff more. So you just kind of brought up basically what I was going to ask in my next question. So for any of you guys, you can dive into the first or the second. It's kind of to the extent that this is a large and potentially useful, but still maybe like overly simplified classification, how do you think about the different parts of like what people talk about when they talk about layer 2? Are they a stack of solutions that can work together? Are they kind of like things that have different trade-offs and different use cases? So for anyone who wants to answer the first question, it's still great, but if you want to get into kind of like how you see different parts of like what we call layer 2 now fitting together, what they're useful for, I think that'd be really cool.
That's what I was going to say actually. There are many criteria that make things layer 1 or layer 2. I think an important criterion is whether or not you have your own economic validation network or if you rely on someone else's economic validation network. So in the end, what makes you trust that Bitcoin transactions are well done or Ethereum or layer 1 transactions is that they have their validator network, and what makes this validator network work is the interest of the participants, the miners, or whoever does the validation. And so, if you are doing a plasma-like sidechain, but you also have a proof of stake or any kind of sidechain that has its own proof of stake validator has a layer 1 component, even though the value of the token that it manages may be on layer 2 with respect to another main chain. So you can have a chain like Scale, that the value is stored in Ethereum, so Ethereum is the layer 1 for that, but Scale also has its own proof of stake validation network. So in this respect, Scale is layer 1, so it can be both. And I think these are very important questions for people who design the infrastructure, but I think people who write the application should not have to choose, because if there's no one-size-fits-all solution of layer 1 or layer 2. What you want is to be able to write your application at a high level that abstracts you from all these details, and then choose, today the technology that works is Scale for this particular use case, or it's Stellar or whatever, because depending on how much money I have what are my time constraints, etc. I will use different solutions. So I would like to separate application development from the infrastructure combination.
Okay, this is a good point. I would agree on that. The application layer is different from the protocol development. A developer doesn't care about what he's interacting with, to be very clear. The developer says, I want to make a payment. They don't care. On the protocol layer, I will very strongly argue that layer 2 and layer 1 and layer 2 have a very clear distinction. Something is layer 2 only if and only if it maintains layer 1 security while increasing either its throughput or reducing its latency. If you do not have equivalent security, and very strictly equivalent security to the layer 1, then it's not layer 2. So any network that uses a network of validators, that if 2/3 or 51% of it get compromised, it is a broken system in a way that, not broken, but in a way that its economic security is not of layer 1. It is of whatever it's the security to corrupt that layer 2. So if you corrupt what you call layer 2, and you're able to steal money, then you're not layer 2, you're just an insecure layer 1. To be very, very adamantly on that.
You both have a layer 2 part and a layer 1 part, and I don't think you're broken just because you have a layer 1, otherwise all the layer 1 are broken.
Well, a layer 1 with enough hash power, such as Bitcoin or Ethereum, is pretty good to use as a base layer. If you have some, low hash power layer 1, then yes, it is insecure. So if you have a POS chain with $10 million, I would very easily argue that it's not as secure as you want it to be.
Yeah, I think you very much agree here. I think when we talk about layer 2, it's always in relation to layer 1, right? If there's no layer 1, then we would talk about layers. And so if you look at, I think today's panelists and with this project, layer 2 tend not be focused on what makes Bitcoin, which is a very good layer 1 protocol, like security and being centralized and censorship distance. So you probably won't hear a layer 2 solution say that's what our features are. And the reason is because they can leverage this or anchor their security to a layer 1 protocol. So it's just like internet layers. When you're on the upper layer, then you don't have to think about when you're on the HTTP or TCP, but you're not thinking about how packets being routed or how the wires are being connected and stuff like that. So that's what gives this layer stack approach. I think that would be the pure definition of layer 2. But again, there's also an issue with but that would be the purest part of that course.
Yeah, I mean, George's mentioned a very good point that layer 2 is maintaining the layer 1 security while improving the throughput or reducing the latency. But I just want to add one more thing there is that the reason that layer 2 can improve throughput or reduce latency is because we introduce some optimistic assumption about the system, about the interaction of the components, right? So, for example, there are two kind of categories of layer 2. One is the state channel. I would just like to make a very, very concrete example. You can play a chat for the people who doesn't actually know what layer 2 means. I'm just kind of throwing a traditional
I was
example.
actually just going to ask someone if they wanted to give a take at like what the major classifications within this are.
Right. Yeah. So and now we can play that game in party on chain step by step. That is assuming that like these two parties are never going to cooperate with each other. So we have to like do this kind of using the consensus engine to execute every step of the game or every step of the computation. But we can also assume that these two guys are mostly going to be cooperative, but with the assumption of still with the guarantee that they are binded towards some on-chain contract. Right, so basically they can do this kind of interaction, mutually sign each other's state, guarantee that this state is actually valid, and I agree this is valid. And whenever the other party is trying to dispute or deviate from the protocol, the other party can submit the proof back to the chain, revert to the slow path, and still guarantee the security of the system. So the relationship between layer 2 and layer 1 is really using the layer 1 as not a central processing engine, but as a arbitration of dispute or protocol failures. So that's, I think, the key distinction. And there are other sidechain solutions, and I will not go into that much detail.
No, I like that distinction specifically. I think like thinking of Ethereum as a global settlement layer is as the layer 1 solution, and then thinking about the economy and the economic activity that is possible to be enabled by layer 2. That's how I like to think about layer 2, is right, increasing the throughput, latency, and then also the way that these layer 2 solutions could stack is, in my mind, largely dependent on the collateral that each solution sort of requires. So state channels are really great because they're kind of just like little portals, you can just like shoot them over, but they require a ton of collateral in order to secure the transactions. And Plasma is nice because it doesn't require quite as much collateral. And so if you could build like little economies around, I don't know, if like each store could have like a little Plasma chain involved, and then you could have like little state channels sitting on top of those Plasma chains in some way that could like transact between the stores. I don't know, like I'm just like thinking, I don't know, down the line, if like how a fully like an economic ecosystem built on layer 2, how that would look. And I think it would be a combination of Plasma and state channels, and so you would kind of have like multiple layers on top of each other. So I guess layer 2 is sort of a misnomer in that sense. I think the most confusing term within layer 2 is maybe defining Plasma, because there's so many different implementations out there, and it's so close.
Disagree completely.
This
is objectively wrong.
Okay.
Yeah.
But could we?
We could go into
Want to talk
it.
for 30 minutes on that?
We shouldn't like shit in this discussion. So let's just. This was the wrong statement.
So if anyone wants to hear more about that, we've got a Q&A coming up. Okay, so let's actually build up from here. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I think maybe let's expand the conversation to, we've heard now a bunch of different names for approaches to layer 2, for Plasma, side channels, or state channels, side chains, elastic side chains. How do these differ, I guess, from a technological standpoint, but then also from an economic design standpoint? So the place that I want to get into is kind of been referred to a bunch. there's a relationship between not just the kind of the technology of layer 1 and layer 2, but the economics of these different systems and how they fit. So I feel like these is like understanding these as kind of separate but interrelated phenomena is really important. So if anyone wants to kind of do the like 101 of what the economic differences are, then you can get into your project too.
So, what are the design implications, differences between like plasma and channels? Because I do not consider exactly sidechains to be exactly layer 2. Plasma has 0 collateral requirements, so when there is no need to have a counterparty which will have to put up some money in order to facilitate transactions of the system. Plasma transactions have the same economic finality as the transactions that happen on the mainnet. So what happens in Plasma is that you have an operator, which is a not trusted party, which takes the blocks, commits them on Ethereum or whatever else. And the thing is that a transaction which was included in an Ethereum block has the same economic finality, eventual finality, as the one that was committed, as the one in the block that it was committed in. So usually in Bitcoin, you would wait, for example, 6 blocks until you consider your transaction to be sufficiently buried deep enough in the chain to think that, okay, it will not revert. On the contrary, channels have instant finality, so the moment I exchange the signature with Mo on the latest thing, correct me if I say something wrong. And the moment I exchange a signature with Mo about the latest state of either the payments that we're conducting or the chess game that we're playing or whatever, we can both consider that the transaction has been finalized. So, like being strictly strict about this, the finality on channels is the latency between how fast I can exchange signature with Mo, which is pretty fast. Also, the problem is that when engaging in channels, you need to have like a collateral lockup, like the moment that you initiate the channel. So there's a few categories of channels. So if you have a unidirectional channel, so I am just streaming a payment to Mo, I need to lock up collateral, not Mo. But in bidirectional channels, where you want both parties to send money back and forth, both parties need to lock up some collateral. And that is for various technologies, like deep in the protocol reasons for the whole dispute process. So these are 2 main differences. And am I missing any?
Yeah, I think that's a very good comparison between the state channel protocol and Plasma. But like you also mentioned the question of like economic construct. So any blockchain system, economic system, is designed to secure the system as the first priority requirement, right? So basically, how to build a secure and a sustainable state system using some crypto economics design and mechanism design. Layer 1 has that. Everyone knows that. Proof of work is that. Like you mine tokens, and that's kind of the economic incentive to secure the layer 1. So layer 2, in general, has this issue about like you have some off-chain state. Now there's something of a protocol failure or some malicious behavior happen. You need to settle this or dispute and or resolve this state on-chain, and that process itself is a crypto economics problem and requires game theoretical designs to solve that, right? So from that viewpoint, Plasma and state channel is kind of similar because they kind of face roughly the same problem. For state channel specifically, we face the problem of always online requirement. How to lose the constraint of always online requirement, because like the reason is that in state channel you always have your state locally stored, and you need to kind of have this capability to respond to any kind of challenges when you're offline. It's like someone is suing you in court while you're on vacation, right? So you don't want that. You don't want that happening. And solving that is kind of a pretty complex problem. I won't go into the details, but we have a design called the State Guardian Network. It's a sharing line project that is kind of designed to solve that problem. And on Plasma, there's like the data availability problem, which is something that people have been talking about like for a long time. And there are interesting solutions as well.
And one small addition.
That Plasma is generally designed, like designing Plasma is hard because you don't want to make any assumptions about data availability. So both channels and Plasma fall in the category of the layer 2s which use fraud proofs. So if something bad happens, somebody will go to chain they will make an attestation and somebody will or will not challenge. But there is other approach of doing Plasma with validity proofs, such as by using snarks or stars or some other magic. And basically, the problem with this is that they solve the data, they need to guarantee data availability, and they do this by basically taking all the transactions that happen in the block and publishing them on chain. So you either solve the data availability problem by publishing transactions, or you try to make it so that your system is secure even during data unavailability.
Anyone who wants to dive in and add to this conversation, been over on this side for a minute.
Yeah, I think Mo said it pretty well. I think the economics for layer 1 is designed mostly just to make sure your miners are paid and their work is compensated and this is sustainable. So one thing I want to add, like, from layer 1 point of view, when you think about supporting layer 2s, is let's say the technology will advance and we actually have layer 2 solutions that work really well. And then the rational decision for developers is to go to layer 2 because it's going to be cheaper, it's a more throughput TPS. So in this case, there is something we call starting layer 1 issue. So if there's less transactions that will happen on layer 1, you want to make sure the miners on layer 1 can still collect revenue and basically the layer 1 has still security engine. And this is more of a problem if you have hard cap, because that's a big point. Because if you block reward, stops, right? And purely dependent on fees, then and also your transaction moving to layer 2. And then yes, layer 2 is going to be contributing to transactions to layer 1, but it's going to be not predictable, right? So if you're a miner, you face the issue like in Bitcoin is called fee snapping. So you're facing the issue of should I keep going to mine the next block, or should I mine the one that's next to me that's a very rich block with a lot of fees, right? If you don't know there's going to be a pot built ahead of you, you may not be determined to walk forward to the next blockchain, right? So this is something definitely a potential issue when we design layer 1 or really
Yeah, so I want to add to Jojo's point. So he said Plasma state channel, and I also want to introduce sidechain, right? So when we we're designing Matic network, right? So ours is a hybrid Plasma plus POS sidechain, because Plasma it's hard thing to implement, right? For now we can do asset transfers, some asset swaps, but if you want to do like generalized smart contract and sidechain, Plasma is not there yet. It's not there yet, right? So when we were designing, we thought, how in terms of economic incentives, right? Plasma does not need collateral, as you said, right? So that's a very important design property that you need to design for, right? You need to be designing such incentives that don't need collateral. And so Plasma is the consensus on the sidechain, and with respect to some states right now. If you want to offer a sidechain as well, it will have its own stake collateral, and that will have its own security properties. So you need to choose in terms of designing today. If you want scalability, you need to compromise obviously on security on some aspects. But I don't necessarily agree with only a sidechain solution because that's again that wouldn't characterize, that I wouldn't characterize as a layer 2 solution strictly.
Yeah, I just want to talk about, I think when we think about economics, also, we have, I think, a lot of leading layer 2 solutions up here, kind of fighting for about 50,000 users across every single data in the world right now. And I mean, we have to get this to a real scalable place. And I think one of the main things about how we can do that is have a good user experience for the end user. So, and it's easy to think that these solutions behind the scenes don't impact the end user, but it's absolutely wrong. Like, it's critical that, in my opinion, that the end user doesn't even know they're interacting with layer 2. And when they are, you have usability issues, you have friction, and it ends up being a drag on the industry as a whole. But I do think we're figuring this out. I think when this market does grow, you'll see state channels, Plasma, side chains, and who knows, other scaling solutions really have an impact.
Yeah, so I understand where you're coming from, but I kind of don't agree with the fact that since you want adoption, you want more users, somehow we need to kind of compromise on decentralization. There has to be like a middle path. I'm not saying we need to be very hard. Solutions have to be user friendly, of course. But there is when we take this narrative in the sense that because we need to scale to many users, we need to somehow downplay the decentralization part of it. I think there is a lot of research going into how to make it easy for the user. We are working on it. We have various others working on it. But it's important to make the distinction that we are not building systems which are similar to centralized applications, and that should be a thing which should be very clear in the industry. That we are not an alternative for AWS as it stands now. Right? We need to embrace decentralization in what it is, and then suitably design for it. That's an important point.
So I sort of agree with what you're saying, Jack. Is that it's just in the sense that like it is important to make something that's like usable, and sometimes the notion of like maximal possible decentralization doesn't make sense. Like we ran across this with channels where we were like, okay, well, right now channel transactions are sent over HTTP, and so like they're routed through the hubs. So like hubs could technically censor your payments, and that could mean that you don't end up getting a bunch of like money that was owed to you. And then we were sort of thinking through that, and we were like, okay, well that's something that we definitely need to iteratively change and improve as time goes on, and we're working on that. But we were also sort of thinking, okay, well the other attack vector that exists is that I could just change the CSS on the website to make you press a button that says that you're doing something, but you're not actually doing that, right? And like that attack vector will always exist. So like there's a certain element of like you sort of do need users to like validate their own code, and they're not going to do that, right? Most of the time. But it is important to be extremely transparent about it. Like I think one issue that I see right now is that a lot of existing solutions sort of buy into this like notion of layer 2, and they all appear to have the same security properties when they don't. It's fine to not be completely non-custodial. It's fine to not have economic finality, as long as you accept that, be transparent with users about it, and make like have a plan and action to head towards that eventually. And I think that that's something that like currently I don't see enough of.
I actually want to expand on that point just a little bit and invite anyone to come in. So we've been very theoretical, right? This has been like the theory of layer 2 in a lot of ways. Let's take it into the practical dimension a little bit too. Like what's the state of the technology is, like where it's being used, who's building things with it, and what have we learned? Like either things that are surprising. Let's basically take it into, instead of kind of like this is a theory of how it could work. What have we found in practice so far, and what do you think the biggest issues are going forward that are kind of concerning? So you kind of brought just one of those up.
I think right now, really no one, blockchain is no one anything. Let me say it. Tens of thousands of people who are claiming that we are going to solve the world and change the world and take over the financial system. Well, even if it's 100,000 users, it's still like nothing. And that probably includes people who do the payments, and if you want people who actually actively use that, zero is a good approximation. And indeed, there's an underlying problem. Okay, there's a continuous solution, direct to site, direct to main chain. If you don't want to trust anything, if you can trust that you can fulfill the deadline, then you can do state channels. If you can trust that the operator will fulfill the deadline, you can do plasma. If you can trust that the network validator will do the right thing, then you can trust the side chain. It's a continuum. And where the continuum you want to be? Well, if you don't trust anyone, you want to be direct to the main chain. Anything else, you have to trust something. And then, is it suitable for end users or only for specialized users? If for a specialized user, you can have your machine on all the time. Or otherwise, you have to trust the network of the watchtower or anything. So at some point, the user has to trust someone, and he has to trust someone who will use the code, and each user has to decide what he puts to trust. But I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all. And what I think is, on the other hand, yes, there is a need for abstract and for all that. We need to be able to protect the user for all these choices that are difficult. We need both to be able to protect them and then the administrators make their choices. So it's not a one-size-fits-all protection.
All right. Okay. Yes.
So one really, really interesting lesson that we learned about all this from putting in front of real users is that users don't give a shit about decentralization. They just don't. Like, to them, it's the same thing, right? They're using an application and they expect it to work. If it doesn't work, they'll go after the application, and if enough users have that problem, then like government entities will go after the application. The point, we had to spend a lot of time figuring out what the point of being trust minimized even was, because it turns out when you put this in front of end users who don't know anything about crypto or anything about blockchains, they're just like, okay, well, what's the benefit for me? And for the best answer that we've managed to come up with so far is that the cost of regulations is high. And theoretically, with non-custodial architecture, you can give access to this type of infrastructure to a bunch of other companies who are in this middle gap between, I want to start a company that does something associated with payments or something associated with financial activity, but I don't have the capacity to be regulated, and I don't really want to be regulated. And that's something that I think isn't really talked about enough right now. But yeah.
Do you think that, just I guess, quick follow-up to stay on that.
One of the things that there's an interesting back and forth with is it's a chicken or egg problem in the space of apps that theoretically want to be decentralized and they kind of look to the infrastructure for it versus what the technology enables and what band of interesting applications that opens up. And it kind of sounds to me like you're almost where you have been is that the fundamental limits of the technology or just the design of it is creating the shape for this is a set of applications that might be interested in that. And so that's kind of where we would look. And I feel like that's been a little bit opposite of how it's been. It's really been kind of high level decentralization is really interesting, removal of intermediaries, and then let's go to town. Whereas kind of what you've found in practice is it's this is the band. If these criteria apply to you, there's a reason that you don't want to be regulated. That's important. This is potentially an interesting thing.
Exactly. In most material ways for a user, a centralized system is just better, right? Because as a user, you want something that works all the time. Decentralized systems don't work all the time, and that's sort of how, unfortunately, how they operate is they have all of these extraneous conditions that you have to solve for. Yeah, it's basically just that we've sort of found that there is this existing notion, as you mentioned, of people who have been building on top of Ethereum. They're just decentralize everything, and I think we'll get there eventually. But the things that are important to decentralize now are the things which you literally cannot do in the existing financial system, right? Which is allow a payment company allow a company to integrate payments into its interface very, very easily at low cost without needing to do any licensing, and that just doesn't exist right now.
So,
Sorry, I keep putting on mute.
Arjun has obviously the actual Mainnet3 experience, and we have been also running on testnet since last October. So if there are 3 lessons that I learned, there are the following. First is that layer 2 is definitely helping in terms of gaining user attraction, user acquisition, and retention. The second lesson is that layer 2 is also confusing to many of the people in terms of onboarding, offboarding, because they just learned about blockchain. Now there's additional concept of layer 2, and they usually get confused with centralized solution. And the third part is that finally it's the regulations. Now let me expand on both all of the 3 points just a little bit. The first point is that layer 2 is working. So we launched we launched on testnet last October, and over the last about 6 months, the user count grew about 50 times. We don't have a lot of users, to be honest. We have maybe 20,000 users on a single application on a paper money testnet. We literally issued a token that people can play. It's ERC20 token on Robinson. It's double fake money. people are still playing this daily, and one active user on average play about 24 games on our platform, and it's a fun, pretty fun board game you can play with your friend and win this kind of double fake money. And we have users from 80 different countries. Many of them from our user cities are probably not crypto native users. You probably heard about crypto, but never actually know how to use this stuff except for buy coins from Coinbase. But they still use it. So because Layer 2 does provide this kind of smooth user experience, and many of the micropayment applications, I believe, will also have the relatively similar characteristics in the future for Layer 2. It kind of mimics the user experience once people actually onboard and enter the application. But at the same time, Layer 2 user experience is also very hard because for probably not in the plasma case, but I'm just talking from a channels case. Because in state channel, you always have the first step to deposit some money into the state channel contract, and that confuses a lot of people. Many of our users who has no idea what Layer 2 is, probably not even what blockchain really is. It's just they are mostly traders and token holders, and they're thinking that we are holding custodian of their fund, and that's an extremely dangerous thing for us. I'm sure you guys probably had the same experience.
Basically, the hard part about Layer 2 is that you still have to do stuff with Layer 1.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You still have to do a deposit.
That's right. So, but after all of that, we hopefully we can fix that little bit issue, and we're pretty confident in that because we have this awesome Layer 2 that is already boosting user retention and all that stuff. But finally, it still comes on to regulation because, for many of the countries we have users for, once we actually launch this for real money, or when they can actually pay or use this kind of micropayment transactions, there's still no way to convert fiat to crypto. Means they feel that the user experience is awesome, but that's we think is kind of what currently blocking all of the technology. Even if we have the technology actually ready. That the conversion part is still kind of a hurdle and barrier that I can see that keeps me up at night.
So regarding trust minimization, I would so we still test it, but we are integrating with Decentraland, and so so it's an interesting experience in terms of when you see that Decentraland has virtual assets, and they also have games working on Decentraland, and so what they've taken the approach is, they take assets from the main chain to a side chain via Plasma, which still maintains the characteristics of those assets. But things like game states are stored on the side chain, right? So the degree of trust minimization really depends on what value you ascribe to the state, right? So something like Decentraland land is valuable and makes sense to be on the Ethereum main chain and can be ported to the side chain. But things like reward points or game stage data, that could be on the side chain. It could even be in a centralized database. Doesn't matter. But in the interest of keeping the developer experience similar, it makes sense to be both of these solutions to be on a side chain or EVM or similar kind of thing. So that's my take on the degree of trust minimization that can be, and this is I would think it's like a concrete example.
Yeah, so I think one cool thing about this panel is that almost every single developer who's building on any of these platforms is probably talking to one of us. So we get to see the growth, we get to see the development. And what I'm seeing with the scale is, and I'm sure you guys are all seeing similar things here, is developers are rethinking the way they build applications. And so they had constraints before that meant they needed to use smart contracts in certain ways or transactions in certain ways. And now they're actually, specifically with games, I'm seeing a redesign of the gameplay, a redesign of the game mechanics, having fast finality all of a sudden with 1 second block times, having high throughput at low cost. It just changes the way the experience can be shaped. And so I think you're going to see everybody up here making these projects and applications successful over the next 6 months. I think we're going to see some real wins, and I don't know, I'm more excited than ever.
Yeah, so I actually wanted to kind of get into this a little bit. one of the things that's really interesting and unique with crypto as compared to other previous technology movements is that because it is effectively public markets right away, there's a hyper-compressed sense of like how fast things are supposed to move, right? Like in traditional startup industries, if things were building in labs for 10 years and you can get funding through Series B, Series C, and it's totally reasonable. Like that's just the time scale to build new things. Because we're living in a world of like basically semi-public markets with tokens right away, there's a tendency to think like, oh, if things haven't delivered in 6 months, 12 months, whatever, it's a failure, right? And so kind of with that context as background, where do you think we are with Layer 2, what you're trying to build? Are we right about where we're supposed to be? Are we a little slower than you thought it was going to happen? Or are we actually farther along?
So I can say this with Plasma specifically. So Plasma is hard to do. If you want to generate smart contracts running on Plasma sidechain, that's the solution is way out. We've been progressing on various approaches. That's going to take time, right? So I mean that's an interesting question in the sense, how do we bridge the gap between today and when the technology becomes mature? You take some assumptions about trust minimization, and you deal with what you have today. Be transparent to users about the technology, what it can enable, what cannot, and then build further. I think that's kind of the outlook that most people should have.
I think people really overcomplicate things, like a lot. So obviously this is a little bit different when you get to like the decentralized network stage, right? Because upgrading decentralized networks is extremely difficult. Upgrading like core protocols that people are building on top of takes like decades, and that's what happened with like HTTP and HTTPS. But you can still build like minified versions of networks and run them and test them relatively quickly. And I think that that's something that like wasn't like a lot of people are doing now. Like we're doing this, Stellar is doing this, like other like Plasma implementations are doing this, where they're building like the minimum possible thing that they can use and put in front of users and start getting people actually using it. I think in the past, a problem was that people were trying to build something that scaled to like 1,000,000x from day one. And you can have a maximally scalable system, but it's completely useless if nobody uses it.
I think one problem that we're discussing here, I'm not sure it's the right place, is the fact that the UI is important. If you have all the tools that are in the infrastructure is trustworthy, but the UI is not trustworthy because you're using a Windows or whatever device that is easily cracked, then you can't really put money or value and have something usable by anyone because the terminal is bad. So we have to also fix the terminal, and that requires a lot of work, both hardware and software. I think better operating system, operating systems in HGX and Day, and a lot of usability issues for that. And is layer 2, is layer 3, layer X, I don't know, layer user, that's also important.
Okay, first things first. So on the UX side, Layer 2 has objectively superior UX than Layer 1. The one thing that you need to do on Layer 1 is you need to do approve, transfer, whatever. You need to wait 15 seconds based on huge fee depending on what ICO is running. On Layer 2, on channels, it's instant. You press sign on the MetaMask, or if you're using some other wallets such as Proteus, you're fine. On Plasma, you need to wait some seconds, but that's still okay because you paid nothing for your transaction. But I want to make this very clear distinction that on the channels, I believe that more or less the research has converged in what more or less needs to be done. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the state channels researchers and developers are trying to basically standardize the efforts so as to get into a universal design that is best for everybody, and so that everybody works together and we go to the moon. But on the Plasma side, so Plasma is a design, channels is a design that has been around since the Satoshi white paper. He has a sentence somewhere which says we could do this, this, and that by signing messages of chain and then settling. Plasma, in the sense that I have a chain that commits messages to the other chain and it defines some game that allows me to withdraw the assets, has been around since August 2017. And since then, we indeed, as you said, have seen millions of designs, but that is not a bad thing.
Can you speak less loud or further from the
Oh, is it?
I think it's worse for us up here, but I don't know.
Is it that loud?
No, there are some effects.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But on the Plasma side, like it has been around 22 months since it was created, let's say. And during that period, we indeed have seen multiple iterations, but that's the important thing. It's an iteration. It's not a pointless branching out for marketing or whatever. So currently, right, like, I don't know, like, that's my understanding at least. So currently, the designs that are being worked on, like Matix, more viable Plasma with sites integration, is a nice experiment. Like somebody else is experimenting on something else. In 22 months, nobody ever converted in a new revolutionary L2 design with some external, with some exotic new properties. And the current fact is that the Plasma, that like my focus has been the cash and cash flow, and pardon the name, but like the cash flow integration, actually we're working on like a version which will support channels on top of it, which you somehow knew about. But like the whole notion is that instead of, while maintaining that the Plasma chain that you don't have collateral requirements, you have like, and you have like basically a light client that stores very little data, you also maintain the instant finality from channels, and you're able to specify more complex spending conditions because as far as I know, for example, in the Matic and in all more or less Plasma constructions, the only operation that you can do is A sends to B. You cannot make A and B and C sign a transaction which reallocates funds to D if and only if like some time lock has expired or if some other asset has appeared on the chain and so on. So this means that while building channel with Plasma, you can basically specify more complex spending conditions for transactions. And this is the current state of the research. And so I'm very confident, or like I will claim that the research is converging on the Plasma side, and that the production of like getting such networks in production which are feature complete and encompass all the layer 2 features, it will happen in less than 12 months and it's like close to the end.
I actually have a question. Do you think your Plasma research? Okay. Do you think Plasma research has to necessarily be a convergent process? Because like
I think there's definitely one best design. Yes.
Best design, but like you can have different implementations that operate differently, and like they don't necessarily need to talk to each other, right?
Oh yeah, like who cares about interoperability?
So that might also be the
We
difference.
can work on interoperability after there are users.
Right.
But like at the moment, like you can very easily get a chain that can handle 2.5 or like any amount of transaction that your server can handle. But the interoperability, like, what do you want? Like, you can just copy whatever Polkadot are doing, literally just copy it, and just the cross-chain protocol will be A send some money to B,
Right.
you add some chain ID, and you will need to modify the game somehow. But the pushing problems were like getting a Plasma that has no mass exit problems, which are while allowing the light client-side verification, because the MVP and the MobiP variants, they require you as a user to have to store all the data required from the sidechain, while the cache and all its children, it allows you to basically have full security while having like a few kilobytes or megabytes of data, which is like very, very powerful for scalability.
Thanks, you, and just guys, warm up if you have questions, so we're gonna throw it out to you in just a second.
Oh, I just wanted to like go back on the state of layer 2 and in the greater context of Ethereum as a like surviving between all the new chains that are coming out. I guess it's essentially Ethereum, we have the first mover advantage. It's also the really, in my opinion, the like true decentralized smart contract platform today. There's new chains that are coming out, and I guess like EOS, Tron, they grab developers because they're slightly easier to build on top of, and they just have a ton of money, right? That's kind of the key. And so in order to bridge the gap between today and when we can finally sort of hit sharding the US, the layer 2 solutions are really critical to sort of fill that gap. We have been, obviously the development has been moving along, I think, and there's a lot of progress going and a ton of things going on in the back end. And this is me looking in. I'm more of a, I have like layer 2 researcher on my title and the whatever here, but I'm kind of more of a layer 2 fanboy. I like hanging out with these guys and talking about all their implementations. But I think the key really is going to like keep pushing code out. I really commend like Amin and SpankChain, the Connects team, for like really getting these things in the hands of users, because the design patterns and the insight that is gained through that process is really, in my opinion, and from what I see, is really critical to continuing to refine and development. So I'll be really excited to like see whenever Plasma and the other implementations come on.
Cool. Do you have questions out there? Yeah. Do you guys want us to do it with the mic so that it's good for the video? Yeah.
Thanks.
Just before that also, very quickly, I just want to clear, I think there was a mention of multiple Plasma implementations, like there being a lot of Plasma implementations. The thing is that to an outsider it seems like there are a lot of different kind of variants, but essentially they're trying to solve the same problem, right? And what George said in terms of convergence, that is going to happen sooner or later. But it doesn't mean that these are at odds with each other. Each Plasma variant brings a specific approach to the design space, and whichever approach makes sense, I think the industry will converge very fast. Sorry, please.
In what ways are side chains and plasma chains different?
I'm gonna put it in the middle and then fight.
Yeah. So that's really like okay.
So, I would say there's trade-offs, right? So with a side chain, you are trusting that the security model is going to work, right? And in traditional side chains, if the chain goes down and no one's running it, and there's not a system or a network to replace those validators, then your money might just be stuck, right? So we're working on Elastic Sidechain, which is a network that solves for a lot of those issues, but it's still a BFT network, which means if 2/3 of all the operators or validators were malicious or Byzantine, and then 2/3 on your particular sidechain went rogue, then you could effectively get hit with double spend. But you don't have a lot of other issues and data availability issues, user experience and setup issues that you have in these guaranteed, places with fraud proofs and so there's drawbacks. You have to figure out as a developer how you design for these, how often if you're using sidechains, maybe you have things settle back frequently. Maybe you need to and obviously don't put $1 million home on the sidechain, and you're also trusting a network to effectively show that it's secure over a period of time. So I think there's strengths and weaknesses, and I think, frankly, you're going to see both be really successful in areas where they play really strong. But I'll let the Plasma guys go for it.
So yeah, really quickly. So not going into too much detail, but so in terms of trust minimization, like I said before, Plasma chains are basically a cryptographic construction where you don't have to. You don't need to put trust in the consensus of the sidechain, right? So the construction, the Plasma construction itself provides the security. That's kind of like the main difference. That's kind of like the main difference.
So sidechains, independent security model. I have a proof of work, I have a BFT 2/3 with $10 million. So to corrupt that chain, the economic cost is $3.3 million plus some dust above that. To corrupt a Plasma chain, you need to corrupt the layer 1. And I don't know what's the cost to corrupt Bitcoin or Ethereum right now. The difference is that on the sidechain, the economic cost is 3.3 million in our example, but in Plasma, actually, the economic cost is 51% attack on Ethereum or Bitcoin only if the parties who are being defrauded watch the chain while fraud happens. So there's a certain liveness assumption. So whenever some party tries to make a withdrawal from the sidechain, that party will basically go to the smart contract on layer 1. He will say, please, smart contract, unlock my funds. And the smart contract specifies that these funds will be unlocked after time t. That gives a security parameter. The longer you set t, the more time there is for somebody to come online and submit a fraud proof. If nobody comes online during that time, yes, you will lose the money. So there's this very strict liveness assumption. So you could argue, perhaps, which I do not agree, but like you could argue with, that the economic security of the $3.3 million of the whatever other chain you're using, it could be more than the 51% plus liveness assumption. I do not agree with that, but like somebody could argue that. So there's that. On the alternative, if you go with a plasma chain, so if you're familiar with the ZK rollup design that is being worked on by Matter Labs and some other people, which basically I still have the data on the latest block, I still commit it, but instead of blindly committing some data and then requiring that you submit a fraud proof if things go wrong, the operator must commit data and a validity proof. And the validity proof basically says that a zero-value proof that states basically that the state from time t, from like the previous state, the state transition is valid. How this happens is basically it has that it's a black box that kind of puts in all the computation, it puts out the proof, and this proof can be easily verified, easily as in like 2 or 3 millions of gas on Ethereum to state that the state transition was okay. Is that clear? Okay, so the main thing to notice here is that the blockchain, like the liveness assumption, has this problem that if the layer 1 gets congested, for whatever reason, so there is some spam attack or so on, and it is problematic because if within this time t, I do make the challenge, but nobody does it because status ICO is running. What am I going to do? So this is the main reason why you want to make sure that the basic area you're running is sufficiently, has enough hash power. So your layer 2 security is not as layer 1. So my final point is that if you use a layer 1 that has less economic security than corrupting the sidechain based model, so if corrupting 51% of the layer 1 was less costly than the 3.3 million attack that we said earlier, then yes, sidechains are better. But you will use Ethereum for Bitcoin, right?
And I think we're also omitting the fact that these systems, these VFT systems are worth tokens, and there's incentives, and they're typically loaded with venture capital dollars to start these networks and need economic input to be staked into the systems, which makes an attack incredibly costly. And again, so let's say I have $100 million in a sidechain, and it's all 100 million, or not, if I have 100 million in a VFT network that's running sidechains, and it's all venture capitalists who have clear economic incentives for the token value to go up, and they're working with professional validators, then I might need 200 million to take over and do a 2/3 attack. So, but don't put something on the sidechain that's worth 200 million or $1 million per transaction. So that's where you can take advantage of the security trade-offs, but have wins without the same user experience issues. So.
Can incentives work when regulation comes in?
What's that?
Can incentives work when a regulation comes in? So
like a state level.
the SEC or whatever, whoever you want, comes in and says, you make an invalid state transition, or I will imprison you for 100 years.
Or you're running a Starbucks.
I'm trying to make it clear that there's a very clear difference in the threat.
But so that's a question of having authority versus permissionless networks too, right? Who runs these networks?
Layer 2 is supposed to be as permissionless as layer 1.
Yeah, so in a permissionless network where the validators are staking in and no one knows, it's just like if I were using Ethereum. So if it's an authority chain, then yes, I think.
But the venture capitalists, people know who the venture capitalists are.
Yeah, but what nodes are they running? So, I mean,
they should be forced. I'm sure there's some regulatory requirements.
I think that attack vector, I don't think anybody's clear from if we have the authorities coming in, telling everyone to shut up.
So, if you guys want to talk about site checkers, I want to make sure we kind of diverge from question one. Other questions?
So, my question is like kind of two-pronged, I guess, but the first part is, to what extent do we think that like plasma might not actually work in terms of like a successful layer 2 scaling solution like over a long period of time? And the second part is, you know, as the crypto space matures and whatnot, and we see, you know, possibly network activity aggregating towards, you know, a few blockchains, let's say namely Bitcoin and Ethereum, and because of the first part of the question, I'm implying that plasma might not be successful, just to offer a contrary viewpoint, to what extent are you guys anticipating possibly some kind of network effect like that happening over the, you know, foreseeable future, where a lot of the activity is moving from whatever chain you guys are working on, or if it is Bitcoin, how do you see that happening, and like how are you anticipating that, I guess?
I wanted to take this in completely different direction, so I'll just say that whether Plasma or sidechain or even just directly on Bitcoin or other networks, there is a staggering complexity, and when you add a layer 2 on top of the layer 1, you add even more complexity. And if you want to build a state channel on top of Plasma, on top of Ethereum, we add even more complexity, and then how can you even trust this complexity? I believe that in the future, we will need to use more and more formal verification and ways to mathematically prove that the thing do actually what the user thinks it does. And I think that also helps with what Arjun said about evolving the protocols. If you have proof that the protocol is no worse than the previous, that can in the future help them improve protocols faster than the 10 years that we have right now between HTTP1 and HTTP2. And so I believe that to deal with this complexity and to deal with the adoption of this complexity, we have to adopt more and more formal methods. And that will be a crucial step to these things becoming not just a toy or an experiment, a great experiment, but something that billions of people can use.
So I think 2-3 questions in your entire. So one, when you say the world might move to a few different blockchains, right? So it depends upon, you need to ask why, right? In the sense, if Ethereum maintains, let's say, the same security parameters as it is right now, why would people shift to a different blockchain for the same use cases? Mind you, I mean, I don't mean like a 10 million TPS blockchain which is coming. I don't mean that. For the use cases that Ethereum is useful right now and for the foreseeable future, I don't see people moving to many other layer 1 blockchains. In terms of Plasma failing, what something or the other. See, what is Plasma? It is a way to move transactions off the chain and kind of bring scalability to the picture. Now, what kind of construction will work? The last Plasma was released in August 2017. The paper came out. A lot of implementations came starting out in December, January. It's been such a short while. We've seen so many implementations and so many different, fresh approaches to the same problem that I am very confident that all of these will converge and we find a reasonable approach to kind of standardizing and bringing scalability to smart contract transactions. I don't see activity moving to a lot of these layer 1 blockchains if they don't follow the same security properties as Ethereum, as long as we know that what use cases are being Ethereum solves for now.
Yeah, I'll counter that in saying that there's this like vision of this like multi-chain / single sharded chain / Plasma Ethereum chain, which is effectively, I would also argue, is a very similar kind of thing as like a beacon chain in shards. There's this vision of that, which is sort of slightly different from different parties, but appears to be like this convergent vision on what an eventual system would look like. And I think that's like realistically, that's what you can probably expect to see. It's like not just some one clean base layer that works very easily across everything, but some like jury-rigged thing that's sloppily thrown together that just interoperates with each other and inspects a bunch of different things, and it ends up being sort of annoying to deal with. That's how the internet works today.
Actually, I believe that as the layer 2 takes over and becomes mature, which layer 1 you use will not be directly relevant, because you can all be abstracted away from layer 2. And you'll be able to hold Ethereum and pay someone plus Bitcoin or whatever. With yes, with channel or whatever layer 2 decentralized exchange will happen. Which means that in the short run, all layer 1 will be indistinguishable. And what will distinguish layer 1 will be, in the long run, their ability to maintain their presence facing innovation, and that's the problem of governance. I believe that the main things that will distinguish layer 1 in the long term will not be any of the features that they have or don't have today, but how good their governance is to follow technological advances.
Yeah, obviously, only the best support layer 2 protocols. So, one thing that we were thinking about and what we do is, when you have layer 2 succeed, then there are natural cross-chains. So we have a lot of Polkadot costumes that are cross-chain technologies. But I would say layer 2, if we really build what we want, is also natural, the possible layer 1s. In that future, like I think what Francois said, when you have many layer 2s that have different hash algorithms, signature algorithms, crypto primitives, and then they have the different virtual machines that potentially need to be evaluated on layer 1, right? So that's something that we're anticipating. This is a reason that we chose a very low level VM. So you can run EVM on our VM, you can run, if you want, and run 170 on top of our VM. Just, those are the sort of technical constraints that we see and we're preparing for.
Just to make sure I understand the second question correct, the second question seems to be that there are many layer 2 protocols with many kind of team and different different whatever. So and maybe different stage options. What's this long-term survivability of each of them? Will there be like a similar things like what happened in layer 1, layer 2, that there are like 1, 2 things that stands out and take over basically the account dominance? Is that kind of the second question?
Yeah, basically.
Okay. So, well, I think that's a very interesting question. We actually just spent like about 10 hours today. A lot of time with a bunch of researchers who kind of try to avoid that. If we don't do anything about that, yes, there will be this weird incompatible word. There, a lot of state channel applications are going to build up different stacks, and the survivability of the project is determined by how many capital we each want to waste on a very preliminary things. And I think that's something that it is possible. It seems to be possible to avoid by even we start with different kind of implementations, but having a interoperable protocol level standard, even with entirely different implementation, entirely different software stack, to kind of converge towards a more converged layer 2 vision. And while that's something that a bunch of state channel researchers are trying to work together and trying to move towards, we'll see how it goes. No promises of any kind. But yeah.
Other questions from the audience?
So we talked about the same, a lot of the same layer 1 protocols today. Is there any particular that any of your solutions are looking at directly today, and why? Outside of like Ethereum and Bitcoin you've been talking about.
Cloud can build on any layer 1 that has sufficient safeness. So if I have the ability to commit data, create primitive tools like verify primitive tools and verify signatures, I can build and have some basic safe machine, I can build Plasma on the way. So currently the best option is Ethereum, but I will start on the future some very same features that we can so we can implement along with them. And I have a proposal for that if you want to know about that.
So, interesting problem. So, we started with blockchain policy vision. So, all of our software, from the ground up, making available is, designed to be interoperable across blockchains. We, as kind of an effort of trying to keep this, we actually did the integration with Unity, in like a one slot. And to make sure that, mostly to make sure that we actually have this kind of interoperability available. And recently, we, right now our priority is to push out the VNet launch and also have real life volume and networking around blockchains. But at the same time, we're looking at the different kind of upcoming blockchain infrastructures and see if we can support or build on top of them with the same kind of blockchain assumption and the protocol levels on them. And that's kind of I'll take the reason that we are looking at this kind of new blockchain ecosystem is because they're still relatively new. So there are a lot of things to learn that is not exactly perfectly optimized for layer 2 on Ethereum for good reasons maybe. But many of the relatively early projects is still at a stage that is very manual, can get these things early on. Some technical optimizations which is kind of critical and this will not be with these stuff. That's something that we see as kind of opportunity.
Yeah, I think if you look at today, realistically, it's going to be predominantly here, just because that's the most shady, that's the community, and for us, we are, our testnet is coming out this weekend, so we're definitely very excited to work with layers, other layer 2 teams to, this is really
I recently published on Medium an article on how to compose contracts if you have access to the blockchain history. And blockchain history is something that most blockchains don't offer you easy access to. So I'm asking all layer 1 designers and developers to add features to their chain if they don't have it. And that's why you can see that some layer 1s are basically unresponsive and very, very hard to deal with and to evolve. To add a feature to Bitcoin, the bar is very, very high. And if I deal with people like Nervos or to the point Tezos or Cardano or other blockchains like that, it's easier to discuss with our designers and to get features adapted. So I think this kind of ability to add new features is something we, as layer 2 designers, inform layer 1 providers. Can they provide the features we need? And there are not that many of them who want quite cryptographic primitives, who want the access to the history of the chain, etc. Can they do that for us?
So the question was are we trying to integrate this with other blockchains? Yes.
Right. We talked a lot about securing Bitcoin thing and Cardano, but is there any particular layer 1? There's a lot of new layer 1 solutions coming out, right? That people are hyped about. Is there any in particular that you're looking at and why?
There's not anything in particular that we're looking at, mostly because we just don't have bandwidth. We've been really heavily focused on our own stuff, but at least the way that we've architected this is that it sits on top of the EVM. So, and it seems like the EVM is generally a standard right now for how blockchains execute. And so anything that runs the EVM could run next.
So we are currently building only on Ethereum, but Plasma is kind of agnostic, and if there is a layer 1 blockchain that we think kind of has user adoption, developer adoption, and as you said, right now we are designing all of it on EVM, but tomorrow if there's some new thing coming, but so Plasma is more or less agnostic. As long as you implement it correctly, it can put it to any blockchain. Currently, we are not looking effective because Ethereum is where we want to go ourselves first.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear Ethereum's got a lot of our attention up here, and I think deservedly so. There's just, if anyone's going to ETH New York, look forward to seeing you there, and if you're not, you should try to go. You'll see the developer community brewing. It's really amazing, and so that's where we're focused. Also, I think there's cool stuff coming up like Nervos, and you know, hey, well, I think all of us will support the customers, we'll support the, you know, the dApps. So we'll see. We'll be excited.
All right, we have one from Twitter that we'll use as kind of wrap up because it's perfect for this. So a junior VP at Boeing and a senior project manager at Medtronic walk into the country club, so the golf club, at 8 a.m. on a Saturday. Explain layer 2 to them in the time it takes to grab a cup of coffee so that they can't stop thinking about it for the next 18 holes. So it's super, super hard. So I'll expand it, use my moderator privileges to expand it to, well, one, if you can answer that, that's awesome. And it'll be immortalized on film. But I think what he's getting at is like, what's the big exciting thing that like when you're stressed out and you're frustrated you don't want to build anymore that gets you like stoked and re-energized?
So I would say security, there's a layer for security, and there's a layer for activity, okay? That's the difference, and then there's a million variants, and this is or that isn't, avoid that, but layer 1 is where you keep things that are valuable, layer 2 is where the action happens.
So I tried. So if you've heard of so for years we've been hearing about the promise of blockchain, right? I mean, blockchain is going to change the world, it's going to change how money is run, how the entire economy operates, right? Today you can't do it on the layer of blockchain. Layer 2 might just eliminate.
So I'm not even going to try with Platinum. So for a bunch of finance people, Ethereum is a settlement layer that lets you do any type of finance. Channels or layer 2, or specifically state channel networks, are just a clearance layer on top of that. So they let you clear any transactions that can be settled later. What I think is most exciting about that is that it opens up a whole host of use cases which just aren't possible today, associated with doing really small transactions, or doing international transactions, or doing very frequent or just very abstractly conditional transactions. And infrastructure variable.
I will say that what exactly about layer 2 is that it's a way to commoditize layer 1 and move the action where higher stage of abstraction and things that users can do. So in the future we'll be able to write applications on the blockchain just like in the past Microsoft helped people write things in higher level assembly language. So we will be able to write applications with higher focus on the economics. This is a poker game, this is a derivatives contract, this is an insurance contract, and don't look at what's games anymore.
I really like objectives first. So layer 1 is the layer of value, right? And layer 2 is the layer of activity. So we talk about like a person playing golf and country club. So assume they're rich. So layer 1 would be like their asset custodian, right? So to keep their assets secure, whatever they think is valuable, secure, not going to be attacked. And then layer 2 is going to be this like exchange, or really efficient marketplace that they can transact. Layer 1 and 2.
Yeah, I like that. It could be kind of like I like layer 1 security, layer 2 or the transaction layer is more or less. It's like layer 2 is kind of like your wallet that you carry around, your credit card, and then layer 1 is more like the bank, like the trove that you store all your things.
Yeah. So if I want to explain to like finance in the investor, so so it will be blockchain will be the stuff that can let you use your money in whatever way you want. But with the caveat that in the process of using it, it's like learning to ride a horse, from the west from the west coast to east coast, right? So, but if you're using layer 2,
it's like you're taking a flight. It's as simple.
Cheap, instant, unstoppable payments with security better than your bank account.
All right, I'm hiring you for marketing stuff. I was okay with it. No one said, how do you pay for Spank Chain? I know that's the obvious joke. All right, guys. So I'm going to wrap so that you guys have time to come say hi to everyone and talk a little bit. But thank you all for being here. Thank you to our panelists. I think this is a hugely important area, and I think it actually shows such development in this industry about what we were talking about last year at this time versus what we're talking about now. It's so much more real and fundamental that it's really exciting to be here. And so last thank you to Crypto NYC for hosting us. It's a really, really nice space, and thank you for that. So hope everyone has a great rest of your blockchain week.